Okay, I'll continue to admit attendees upon arrival, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to have this very important discussion. Thank you so much for attending and joining. We are recording, so this will be made available on the Start.Pivot.Grow.com website. You will receive a follow-up feedback survey following the event. Please share your thoughts and feedback and needs. We want to continue to improve and make sure that we add value to your business and your life. Thank you so much again for my guests who have joined me today. I have Saudia Davis, president of Ivy Strategy Consulting, on the line with me today. I also have Alisa Sheard from the U.S. Small Business Administration here. And I have Emily Perlmeter from the Federal Reserve Bank with me today. And these ladies are experts in their field, very, very knowledgeable. And I'm extraordinarily grateful to have them join me for the 2024 State of Small Business for Women and Minorities address today. So much information to share with you all. So I look forward to getting started. I'm going to talk about small business very briefly. My name is Cynthia Nevels. I'm the president of Integrality. I am also the founder of the Start.Pivot.Grow Accelerator. And I've been involved with small businesses, whether it's been SBA or other organizations, community development, financial institutions, for 22 years now. And I love helping small businesses. And so hosts like this are critical, in my personal opinion, to elevating and helping small businesses, mid-sized businesses, entrepreneurs grow. And so again, thank you so much for being here. Small business, what's happening today? More and more individuals are venturing into starting new businesses or focusing 100% on their small businesses, growing their small businesses. And we've seen a great deal of activity, conversations, news, floating around this space of what's going to happen for, as it relates to women and minorities in the small business community. Business is going to continue to take place and transactions are going to happen, but what is it going to look like in 2024? So I want to talk about that and ultimately give insight into the statistics, one, but then also the resources that are available, and then dive deeper into, okay, well, what are we going to do with that? What do we do with this information in order to ensure that our small businesses thrive and stay afloat? And so, Emily, I want to start with you. If you tell me a little bit about your background first, and then share with me some statistics on what's happening in the small business space, business starts, small businesses as it relates to minority and women-owned businesses that are existent in the United States. Let's talk a little bit about the numbers, Emily.
Hi, thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for having me. Really grateful to be here with these other wonderful esteemed panelists this morning. My name is Emily Perlmeter. Cynthia, you pronunciation. I am a senior advisor at the Dallas Reserve Bank. I have been here for, 12 and a half years. I work for kind of a small group called Community Development. So Community Development was formed after the Community Reinvestment Act passed and was signed into law. So what we're focused on in community development is issues that pertain to low and moderate income communities, as well as small business and small business economic development. And so all things that kind of tie back originally to the CRA. So I've had the privilege for, probably about 8 years now, for working on issues related to small businesses, particularly small business owners in Texas. I have a particular kind of focus and passion for exactly the group that we're talking about today. So that's color who are starting their own businesses, women entrepreneurs, and small businesses that are located in lower income communities, so historically underserved firms. So earlier in 2023, in June of 2023, actually, I co-authored a report kind of getting at this exact question, Cynthia. So talking about, so since COVID happened, so since 2020, we've actually seen this boom in people starting up new firms. And so I took a little bit of looking into the data. So we're using, census data to take a look at who these people were. I think the thing that's so compelling to me is that from January of 2020 through middle of the year 2023, the number of self-employed people of color increased 13%, from 1.7 million to 2 million people. And yet, during that same period of time, the number of self-employed white workers declined 6%. So although white workers are at white self-employed businesses are at 4.7 million, so obviously more overall, we're really seeing the pickup strongly within people of color, but also among women. And that's actually another thing I've been able to take a look at over the past year, is take a look at what's going on with women. So we hear this narrative, and it's true. It does play out in the data that women-owned firms were absolutely crushed when COVID hit, right? And there's so many reasons why, and I can attest to one of those factors, which is being a mother of young children and the childcare burden falling disproportionately on mothers. So mothers had to really take a huge step back when they own their own business in March, April, May of 2020. But the amazing thing is that women-owned firms have rebounded like crazy. They've rebounded at a higher rate than men-owned firms. And women are just really, women and people of color are really the ones driving this growth in startups, which is amazing to see. One more thing I'm going to kind of throw out there is that so the Kauffman Entrepreneurship Center runs a couple of really great data projects, and one of them takes a look at what they call entrepreneurs of opportunity. So what that means is that they can look in the data and say how many people who started businesses did so because they had a great idea and they really wanted to get this idea to market, versus how many of them were in a really tough spot and they really had nothing else to do. So they decided, I guess all I have to do is try to put effort into starting my own business. So those would be entrepreneurs out of necessity. What we saw is in 2020, the share of people who were creating new businesses for an opportunity plummeted. So that's a bad sign. So folks were losing jobs and they were like, well, this is all I can do. I have to stay at home. I got the kids, whatever their circumstance was. They really had to put their energy, they felt forced to put their energy into entrepreneurship, into starting something. But that totally flipped starting in 2021. So now the folks that are still in the game, the folks that are leaving the workforce to create their own businesses, are much more likely to say, it's like 80%, more than 80% are saying, no, I'm doing this because I have a great idea, because this is what I want to have, this opportunity to build wealth for me and my family. So I would say that's a really positive sign, all things considered.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Emily. Saudia, I would love for you to chime in on that, but share a little bit about your experience and your background first, and then what you've seen in your career.
Thank you, everyone, for having me and for being here and making the time to have this important conversation. So my name is Saudia Davis. I am an exited entrepreneur. I had company, a green cleaning and facilities management firm, for about 15 years. And in 2021, it was acquired. From there, I actually went into working a lot on in the VC space. And I started a consulting firm, which we focus on supporting Black and Brown founders primarily. And so part of that work, which is how I know Cynthia, is by running, I'm the administrator for the Black in Business program for Goldman Sachs, which is focused on Black women founders. And to Emily's point, what we've seen is that many of our founders came out of COVID. And so they started their business, Black women that started their businesses during COVID. And Goldman initially they did insight research on Black women and the state of Black women. And through that data, it drove the initiative for 1 million Black women, which is a $10 billion investment that is focused on entrepreneurship, but also on all the other challenges that Black women face, from housing to healthcare, et cetera. But the key thing in regards to entrepreneurship that they recognize that Black women, they were, the wealth gap was 92% between a Black woman and a white male. And that was also in regards to like a large earning gap, right? There's no wealth creation happening. There's no inheritance happening. And there is also not, from owning businesses, owning homes, we were seeing lots of challenges in the data in regards to that. And so we also recognize a key piece of that is the women that were starting, which is what Emily is also referencing. 97% of them were just getting stuck at the starting gate. So they weren't even scaling their businesses. And so there was no growth there. So even though they were in the game, they were really not generating generational wealth, which is really the goal, right? Because unless that's happening, we're just kind of spinning our wheels. And so the program focuses on addressing that. How do we move women that are in that position forward and create jobs, create generational wealth, and create overall opportunity, and what that impact look like on the effects for America, right? From a GDP perspective, which will hopefully increase the GDP at least by 2%, which is not a small number by any means. So that's a little bit about my work and how it intersects as well with Emily's data.
Thank you, Saudia, so much. Emily, I'm going to come back to you and ask a little bit more about these numbers. And so Saudia said something really important. You have more women and minorities entering into self-employment and small business, but they weren't necessarily moving the needle, scaling and growing. Is this something that you all are evaluating or looking at, or have some answers as to what's impacting that?
Yeah, this is such a critical piece. I focus so much on this exact issue. In my role, so I'm a researcher, but I'm not in the research department of the Dallas Fed. And one of the main reasons that that's the case is because what we're trying to do in community development is get actionable research out there, so not academic, written for policymakers and written for folks on the ground who are actually able to kind of use that information, who don't necessarily have to have an economics degree. Because what really we're trying to do is get information to stakeholders who are actually able to kind of like move the needle at the margins. So with that being said, that's absolutely a huge part of what we study. I would actually love, like at the end, if I could just drop in the chat some links to some of my recent research on these topics, because I think kind of going through the data yourself might be the best way to explain, although I could talk all day. So one of the things that we found for startups owned by people of color is that they start off at from the data that we capture at a pretty similar like even playing ground. Now, we're not looking at wealth that they come in with. So obviously that's going to be a really critical component. We don't have that data, but we do know that they're having very similar rates of feeling like they're in a precarious financial situation. They're starting up over that same time frame. They are, pretty heavily reliant on their own personal savings and their family and friends to be able to invest in their firm. And what we really see was the starkest difference. The biggest statistical gap was in ability to access credit for white-owned firms and for startups owned by people of color. Now, we took a little bit deeper look into that, and we said, okay, well, what other things are happening? Is it that Black and brown business owners aren't applying? Well, not in our data set, they are applying. And so we're thinking, okay, well, so what are the other things? So we asked them to self-report credit score. And there's a little bit of a credit score gap in there, but it's not enough to explain that difference, okay? So we lack kind of all of the tools to be able to dig deep into like what lenders might be seeing in terms of credit worthiness. But from what we can tell from just credit score alone, that's not the thing that fully explains it. The biggest gap, what we saw was actually where folks were applying to. So a really fascinating story here for that picture is that Black and brown entrepreneurs are much more likely to go to large banks to apply for a loan. Now, on average, large banks have a lower approval rate. And so there's a little bit of a gap there. So white-owned firms are a lot more likely to apply at small banks, community banks. We did a lot of we had a lot of conversations with some stakeholders about this. And we heard some really interesting things from both some Black bankers, but then also Black-owned businesses, and saying, look, if you're in a small community and you're a white entrepreneur, you may see your local community banker at church, in your kid's kindergarten class. You've got this relationship because there are so many more white bankers, whether they work for large banks or for small banks. And if you're a Black-owned firm, you may not necessarily have that kind of like easy access to someone in your community. And sometimes those little things can kind of make a difference or tip the scale. I will also say we found something similar for women, although we dug in a little bit less deeply. But women are, again, same thing, a little bit more likely to be considered higher credit risk than men who start their firms. And they really do struggle in a very similar way to accessing credit. They may just simply not have those networks. They might feel a sense of discouragement. I think for a lot of, groups that have been, historically undervalued, there is this kind of weight on your shoulder when you enter a financial institution, and even your own perception of how much you relate to that group, that could really throw things off. So we do know that women are denied financing at much higher rates, like more than double as likely to be denied financing than men who start their own firm.
Thank you, Emily. Fascinating information, and I'll come back to this topic here in just a moment. Alisa, you're with the United States Small Business Administration. Tell us a little bit about your background and what you do, but then let's talk about also what you've seen as it relates to women and minorities accessing credit in order for them to prepare themselves for growth and scaling.
Absolutely. Welcome. Hello to everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Again, my name is Alisa Sheard. I'm with the U.S. Small Business Administration, and particularly the Office of Government Contracting. And so I'm the director of the Women-Owned Small Business Certification Program, the certification process that a lot of women-owned small businesses seek because they're trying to enter into the federal marketplace and do business with the federal government, like Department of Commerce, Department of Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development. The list goes on. As far as the number of federal agencies that you could potentially do business with. So I manage that certification process, and I provide oversight of organizations that are called our third-party certifiers. SBA has 4 official third-party certifying organizations that also supports this program. And so right now we are at about 10,400 program participants of firms that have received certification via SBA's process. And they are formally prepared to do and engage in the federal marketplace if they so desire to provide products and services for our federal customers. So as far as what you guys are discussing right now, it is a part of the process. It's a part of the experience of our firms that are trying to navigate the federal market, because one, it is not cheap. It's not cheap to try to do business with the federal government. You have to be resourced. You have to be able to cover cash flow. You have to be able to onboard people to support the services and needs of the federal government. And most often these projects are not necessarily always small in size because you're servicing the country. But I wanted to share a couple of things and critical pieces of information that tied to what also Emily and Saudia's experiences have conveyed. Here at SBA, we've seen record-breaking pace, as well as Emily has described, of the number of firms starting small businesses. We are in our third year of seeing reports of over 5.5 million firms submit new business applications. And so that is creating an uptick across all of our programs of engagement, of activity, of wanting to either get certified or either apply for a lending opportunity. All of those things are seeing higher level activities than before. I also wanted to share, and I'll put in the link, a recent study that was recently announced through a partnership with Wells Fargo and Women Impacting Public Policy on the impact and the reports of women-owned small business activity across the entire country. So I'll place that link. They are also smaller backgrounds that break it up into categories as far as Asian women-owned businesses, Black women-owned businesses, Hispanic women-owned businesses, geographic backgrounders, and other pieces of information I think will also greatly align with what Emily is describing. Then as far as lending is concerned, if you haven't heard the news, this is your first time hearing it. You know, the SBA has more than doubled, over $1 billion to Black women-owned businesses. Record-breaking lending has occurred through the changes that we have made to our lending platforms and to our lending requirements. So more women-owned businesses than ever before have been receiving loans, as well as in our Hispanic communities have also been receiving record-breaking numbers in lending. So I'm happy to share that details and those informations. And for you all that are on the call, if you haven't already, identify where your nearest SBA district office is located. A lot of firms, a lot of those in our communities don't realize that there are district offices not too far sometimes from where you do business. Sometimes, well, if you're in Texas, it might be far because that's a big state to cover, but we have multiple locations throughout the Texas area. And so we do want to make sure that you all are aware that there are people on staff in those offices to provide assistance and support your growth and direction of your small business.
Thank you so much, Alisa. That's very valuable. So going back to talking about these small businesses that are starting, scaling, and growing, let's talk about what types of businesses the women and minorities are starting or operating. What I've seen in the past is that more of us start professional service business or service-based consulting businesses versus tech businesses, manufacturing businesses, or engineering businesses. Is this true? Is this what you have seen? Saudia, I'll let you answer that, and then Emily chime in as to what your numbers show.
So at least in my space, that is what I'm seeing. A lot of professional services, beauty as well. And so, you know, to some degree, it's a low entry, right? The startup costs to some degree is a lot lower. You know, and I'm curious to see as well what Alisa and Emily is saying in regards to the tech, or or even in large government sort of industries, right, that require a lot more startup capital to get into, especially funding payroll or just cash flow for the initial investment in training and development or R&D. So, but at least in my space with Black women, it is definitely businesses that they can get off the ground in a matter of months that I'm seeing.
Agreed. Thank you. Emily, what are you seeing? What are the top areas that these businesses are being formed in, industries?
So for women, it's traditionally been pretty concentrated in education and healthcare. A lot of health services, certainly also like beauty, retail, that kind of thing. So for Black-owned businesses, we have a lot of business support, and basically like maybe that's like an accountant. There's a lot of support. Black-owned firms that have been starting up disproportionately so. Asian-owned firms are, again, like women, more likely to be in healthcare and education, and also in leisure and hospitality. So that leisure and hospitality category is, we kind of all know by now, was hit like extremely hard during COVID. And that's actually a big reason why Asian-owned firms suffered. In our surveys, they suffered the most at first because they were overly concentrated in leisure and hospitality, and those that sector, of course, was just crushed. Production of goods and services actually is where a lot of Hispanic-owned firms are concentrated. But it's true that a lot of the tech and a lot of the real estate, professional services, that's more likely to be have a higher share of white-owned.
Interesting. Thank you. And so, Alisa, let's talk about specifically, let's move over into government contracting as an option for some of the professional services, business support services, or these companies or industries that minority and women-owned businesses tend to navigate towards because it is easier to start with a lower cost and barrier to entry. Can you share with me more about your WOSB certification? What does it mean to be certified and how this all works?
Sure. So the WSB certification is an application process. It is submitting a number of documents to SBA and answering a series of questions in the application process. That application is then entered into our system, and all the process is managed through our system called WSB.certify.sba.gov. So again, that's WSB.certify.sba.gov. There's no www before that. You could just enter it into your URL box. And firms are submitting that documentation to SBA. My analysts, I actually have a physical person, a small but very mighty team of individuals that review all of the documentation that is submitted, making sure that we have at least the minimum required documents a part of that package, and that is also spelled out on the website what that should include. And they're going to look that all of those required documents are present and have been addressed in accordance with our regulation requirements. So it's not simply just saying, hey, I'm a woman-owned business. It is a process of demonstrating through your paperwork that you're not only woman-owned, but you're woman-led, meaning you're in control of the entire organization and the day-to-day decision-making of your company. And so that is really, really critical in distinguishing that. The application does take some time to get processed because we do have a smaller team. But once they have completed and successfully receive a letter, you get a letter from, it's my signature at the bottom saying congratulations and everything. But once that letter is completed, you can then make the decision of how you want to begin advertising, marketing your business to your federal customers, potential federal customers. So it is a lot of research. So it's not for the faint of heart. And so it is processes and paths to consider, how do I then begin to explore this particular market? Many times, many firms start with subcontracting, meaning that they are doing business with a larger company versus directly with the federal government, because that way it provides a little bit more time to get exposure, to get experience of how the federal climate is, the culture of business in the federal government, but it's under the umbrella of a larger person that's more directly responsible with all the paperwork and duties that come with managing a federal procurement. And so subcontracting often is the very way that many small businesses start in the federal marketplace. And so those businesses are looking for firms that hold those certifications. They're looking because they have what's called subcontracting requirements. They have to meet certain distribution and usage of firms in certain social economic categories. And so they are trying to satisfy, because they told the government, hey, 5%, 10%, 20% of our work is going to come from our small business community that satisfies certain socioeconomic breakdowns. So subcontracting is often the initial path that many of these firms explore. Then if, as you're growing, or if you are already have a robust network as well as capital to support the robust network that you have, some firms go directly to doing business with the federal customer through either procurements that aren't necessarily larger in size, so they may be like 250,000 or less. That would be another path that firms can start with. Looking for those smaller scale opportunities, again, to build experience and exposure, and then to get prepared to move into the larger scale opportunities where you're seeing 4 million plus 5, 6, 7, 8 million. And so those are different paths that we see a lot of our firms explore in order to really grow in the federal market. One of the other things that I would highlight is to engage in resources and training. One of the things our program offers is co-sponsorship with Women Impacting Public Policy and American Express. It is called Challenge Her. So again, challengeher.us. It is for women-owned small businesses that are looking to engage in the federal marketplace. It's a series of trainings, education, specifically on entering in the federal marketplace. It's specifically training on how do I scale my business into the federal market? How do I navigate all of the pieces of being a federal contractor? How do I bid on opportunities? How do I get capital for my work? That is Challenger is co-sponsored by SBA and supported every single year. And so if you go to that website, you'll see that there's a catalog of all of the pre-existing trainings on specifically federal contracting and growing your business in that space. Did I answer everything there, Cynthia? And if there missed anything, let me know. I'm happy to go back over or cover anything that I might have missed in that.
No, that's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that resource. Are there top commodities that are more popular? And it may not be, but I want to paint a picture for attendees for them to understand what are government agencies looking for?
Absolutely. So it does vary across federal agencies, but I will say the biggest buy across the federal government is professional services. So that's like your management consulting. That would be also other consulting services, trainings for our workforce, things of that nature. But IT services would probably be right neck and neck, if not higher, because we're always trying to build and improve upon legacy systems. Government has always outdated systems and solutions. But there are absolutely other spaces, especially if you're looking to do business with the Department of Defense. So you're talking about your transportation types of stuff, logistics. Our soldiers need things as well to do what they do on a day-to-day basis. And so there are paths and places where we are procuring and supporting services to meet those needs of our boots on the ground soldiers. So those are definitely spaces where we're seeing opportunity. Construction services, anything within that construction industry. We're always building roads and highways and byways. So absolutely, things that you, if you're in the space to support in any capacity, you want to be exploring what that looks like.
Thank you so much.
Would you mind if I just jumped in real quick?
Yes.
Because what Alisa has to say is so, I would be remiss if I did not talk a little bit about doing business with the Fed. I dropped a link into the chat, and now that is the kind of the standing page for our supplier diversity team. Those two men featured there are wonderful people I work very closely with. And it, you know, the Fed, the Federal Reserve System is, I mean, we're not the federal government, we're a pseudo-governmental institution. So it's kind of weird and complicated, but you know, we are absolutely always looking to do business with diverse vendors. So actually there's a couple different webinars. So every month, I think it's the last Thursday of the month, my colleagues do a webinar you can join called Doing Business with the Fed. And they'll walk through all the different steps and about how to register as a potential supplier, just how to get more information. We're looking for things like, you know, construction services, maintenance, janitorial, IT, all of the things that, you know, we were talking about a moment ago. And we are, you know, certainly small business counts as its own category, but we are required to report to Congress. You know, who basically what share of our spend went to women-owned, women-led, and minority-owned firms. So these are really important indicators of how well we're doing. And so if you have any questions, I'm not that person, but please connect yourself, register for an upcoming webinar, and connect yourself with Charles and Kyrie.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very important information. What's really most important for women-owned and minority-owned small business owners is for them to look at alternatives and other sources for revenue for their business. I think sometimes we are very focused on our everyday and what we do. We don't take the time to look and see that there are multitudes of other opportunities for generating revenue for their small businesses if they take the time to get prepared. And so I want to talk, Saudia, about getting prepared and why it is so critically important for supporting growth and scaling. You can't continue to do the same thing and expect different results. So let's talk about the resources that are available for small businesses.
So I think there's any number of ways to think about it, but I think a lot of it boils down to education. And really understanding the nuances of your business. And that comes down to infrastructure. I think a lot of times we don't understand the importance of investing in our infrastructure. We think it's, you know, we don't understand the ROI on that. But it really creates an opportunity for efficiency and capacity building. You can't take on a government contract if your infrastructure cannot hold the weight. Because I think in business, and I will assume and speak for all the entrepreneurs on the line, that your business looks very differently from 1 to 50 employees. From 50, the wheels fall off. And you're like, what just happened, right? It's like all of a sudden payroll doesn't work anymore. You know, the customer service doesn't work anymore. Like lots of things start to fall apart. And if you don't sort of think about how investing in that is going to allow you to run a stronger, leaner operation, increase your profit margins, then you're going to run into issues with reinvesting in your business for growth and scale. The other thing that I see a lot with, you know, with businesses, like they have grand ideas about what they want to do with the business and where they want to go, but then there is not a funding strategy for that. Right? How, you know, and I think there's a lot of challenges in regards to how we think about money and lending that feeds it, right? That sort of, and our relationship with banking institutions, there's a distrust. However, there, you know, I think we also have to take ownership for understanding how we can leverage it and get ourselves feeling comfortable with how to leverage that investment and accessing that investment. It's not easy, right? I think Emily has highlighted that, right? There's some real challenges there, but it's also not impossible, right? And I think the more you plan and you strategize around how you're going to access capital, how you're going to utilize capital, from building cash flow week over week, understanding how to leverage, banking, credit card, angel investors, whatever you need to do in order to drive, profitability. I think having a clear plan and paying attention to the data as you're going through is going to be essential for you to build a sustainable business. It's not easy work. And so you have to educate yourself on every aspect of your business and that's your business and what's happening in the overall ecosystem as you're going through, so that you can innovate and identify opportunities and partnerships that can help you scale more effectively as well.
Agreed. And we'll share resources of business education, entrepreneur education, and other opportunities in the chat later on in the discussion, so that you all become familiar with what resources are available to you. I have to state to the attendees that are on this call and those who will watch in the future, I understand the value of time and how limited all of our time is today. We have so much going on in this world, so much to manage: work, home, school, life in general. But it is critically important that if your business is important to you and it is the stream of livelihood that supports your home and your future, you have to participate in education. You have to fill the gaps. The knowledge that you don't know may hurt you. And often what I've seen in working with $1 million to $5 million businesses in lore is that what they don't know hurts. And the discovery and the learning to fill the gaps and knowledge gaps that you have can help elevate your business. And so I know we're limited on time, but we have to invest the time and the capital that we have to be able to grow. And so, Alisa, I'm going to come back to you and ask you about success stories. Like, talk to me about the people who do take advantage of the opportunities of education and training, who walk through and navigate the difficult process of contracting, and then they come out winning on the other side. Tell me about those stories, and then we'll talk about the others.
Sure, absolutely. So many of our most successful stories are firms that have participated in some type of accelerator program, Goldman Sachs program, or SBA's Thrive program. These are all programs that are really going to help set and build that foundational pieces that Saudia is describing. So those are not your only options, but I highly, highly recommend participating in any of those type of programs that have like a cohort type of module. Because one, not only are you getting an opportunity from learning and training about a different topic or other topics of starting and setting up appropriate businesses, but you're also getting an opportunity of shared experiences with other counterparts. So what you're dealing with, what you're going through, whether it's trying to be a caregiver in all kinds of capacities, many other women-owned small businesses are going through the same exact experiences. And so there, it makes you feel less alone. So a lot of my entrepreneurs that I work with tell me how lonely it is to be the final decision maker. So it's no longer, I feel in the umbrella of my employer, and when those decisions happen, it belongs to that organization or that job or that opportunity. You lie with that responsibility. And that's also part of the challenge with a lot of our women business owners of why so few of them have employees, because it is a heavy hat to wear when you're deciding on cash flow for the payroll decisions, who you may have to lay off, and knowing that you are more connected with your organization than probably our male counterparts would be as far as growing a company. So businesses that are most successful, I've seen participate in those types of and ongoing. So these owners are not ever stopping the learning mechanism. So it's not, oh, I took that class and now I'm good to go. No, as you're growing, as you're scaling to next level, they are introducing other spaces for learning and scaling at the level that they've climbed to. So many of my the firms that are in and well beyond the multi-million-dollar mark, I've seen one firm recently, actually 4 women-owned small businesses recently won a big major $60 billion opportunity with Department of Veteran Affairs. 4 women-owned small businesses through partnerships with larger organizations were a part of the 23 companies that won that opportunity. They really were only going to carve out space for 1 women-owned businesses, and 4 of them won that particular opportunity. And so billions of dollars and managing a company to support billions of dollars of procurement is a very different space if you're in a more micro business state. So you have to be able to continue growing and developing and being open to that in order to scale. So depending on where you are and what you are looking to do in growing your business, I will say the couple of women that I know that are on that vehicle, they absolutely intentionally wanted to grow to that level. That was their intention from the get-go. But others may not want to scale to that level, but whenever you are comfortable with scaling to and striving to achieve, you have to have a plan around that. So, as the saying goes, without a plan, you plan to fail. So you have to plan. You have to come up with what that looks like, even if it is, hey, I only want to make $250K this year. Or, whatever that plan looks like, whatever that way you can identify appropriate resources to support you in that path.
Thank you so much. And it's really, really, really positive to hear that it's possible. I posted on Instagram yesterday that there are some movers and shakers, women-owned businesses that are truly leaving an impact and making a stamp in history with businesses that they started out of their home, in their kitchen. The Honey Pot being one that is now partnering with a larger equity firm at $380 million when it was valued at $121 million, starting out of her kitchen 10 years ago. This is feasible and it's possible. But the major question, and Emily, I'm going to come back to you, is that I feel that women-owned and minority-owned entrepreneurs may be asking is, okay, but the barrier is money. Now, that's one. And I have a different outlook on this. It's not just money solely in the access to capital. It is the preparation in getting ready to access the capital that you've identified that you need. Yes, we have barriers in the way. Yes, we do. But preparation is everything. But Emily, talk to me about this access to capital and what we can do.
Well, this is such a big question. So, when you said the word preparation, it just really sparked something in my head. This is something we hear time and time again. And it is true that on average, white men in our society have had more chances to learn about this, what it takes in preparation and getting yourself all set up for this. And that is completely fair. That doesn't mean that it's too hard for you though, okay? So there are some incredible organizations, and like SBA being one of them. Like there are wonderful government, nonprofit, groups that are on the ground that will help you with stuff like technical assistance. So big fan of SBDCs, big fan of the SBA, big fan of local nonprofits like our DEC here in Dallas, which won a $1 million grant as a community navigator to help with exact issues like this. So when I kind of talked earlier about how there's this disparity in accessing credit for, for both groups, and I mentioned not being able to dig into all of the factors. Really, when we collect our data, it's really driven by, credit score, self-reported credit score. But the other thing we hear so often, and we do a lot of qualitative data collection with lender roundtables, with local government leader roundtables, is how prepared with basic documentation these businesses are. If you are an immigrant-owned business, if you are a business owned by a person of color, if you are a women-owned firm, you must do your due diligence to get your paperwork in order. There are organizations that will help you do this. So, it will be as simple as, accounting statements that just aren't quite up to snuff. You won't have a business plan. You won't necessarily have filed, all the appropriate stuff with your local government. And these are really big barriers that are really fixable. They take time, and there's no doubt about that. But there are organizations that will assist you. And we hear a lot of times that, folks start a business because they have a wonderful idea, but that doesn't necessarily make you good at the administrative tasks. Now, the unfortunate thing is that if you are a small business owner, you have to do the administrative tasks, like to be able to get to that next step. Some of the, we often hear the number one reason that businesses fail is, just related to not having that cash flow, to not being able to have enough money in the bank. And lending is a huge part of why other firms are able to successfully navigate those periods of times where maybe, you've got a delay in getting paid or anything that goes on. So yes, it is a huge issue. There are absolutely lenders who are mission oriented, right? So there are mission oriented lenders like CDFIs, so like Lift Fund in Texas, People Fund in Texas. These are great examples of CDFIs that specifically orient themselves to helping the kinds of businesses we're talking about. And you can get a small loan, like a micro loan, but you can also get counseling and technical assistance that will, 2 years down the road, make you lendable from like a larger bank. There is a lot of work being done on this topic, and it is so true what you've said about not being prepared. You've got to put your best foot forward when you go to try to apply for capital or credit, without a doubt.
Thank you so much, Emily. Saudia?
So I think for me, it goes back to, if your business is organized and you focused on really thinking about what is your financial structure in the business, because it all supports each other, right? It all supports the revenue generating thing that you're doing. So if your financial process is thought out, then it streamlines everything else that you do, right? If your HR is also well thought out, it informs how your contracts are built, your payment strategy, right? All of that has to sync. And so by the time you get to where the bank, if you really focus on having those pieces together, when you get to the bank, it's so much easier, right, to be able to present yourself and to have the documentation to support it. Now, I bootstrapped my business. So I started with, a bucket and a mop and a broom, going from apartments to apartments. So I had to learn this. But when I bring myself back to that point, the other key factor, we talk a lot about education, and I think that's important, but I had to build a network of other entrepreneurs, because there's so much information that we share amongst each other that it is harder sometimes for us to get it from players that are, say, supporting us, but don't fully understand what the day-to-day challenges are like when you are trying to operate your business and getting punched in the face every day, which is how I describe it, right?
Yeah.
So people can have a lot of grand ideas, but there is something about talking to another entrepreneur about the challenge you're facing, and the fact that they're a couple of steps ahead of you, and they can say through experiential sharing, this is what I used for that, or this is how I thought about that, or this is what I tried and it didn't work, so maybe you can try it this way. But it gives you a lot of information to make better decisions in regards to your business. So a lot of the infrastructure, the early infrastructure, absolutely you can get a lot of that through an accelerator. But then in regards to your choices, right? Because in business, what works for one business might not work for another. And each of us as entrepreneurs really, and you see this all the time in business, where we could have the same product and we don't do as well as the next person, right? And why is that? It can be the consistency of delivery, can be the marketing strategy, can be a lot of different things. And so the more you can build that network, that board of advisor that you can, that's dealing with the issues or have dealt with the issues or can be a thought partner to you, the better off you are in terms of building out what you need to do. And so I'm a big person on Audible. If there's a challenge in your business that you are trying to figure out, get a book, listen to it, and understand all the different elements that you might not be thinking about that can help you come to a decision. The other thing is that I really love is entrepreneurial podcasting, where you get to really learn about different business models. I took a lot of different business models into my business, which made it unconventional in our space. But we were able to redefine a lot of how you do business in our space because of it, right? And so really thinking through, like, even HR payment models, the compensation models. I took different ideas and implemented it in a business that oftentimes had a 300% turnover rate, which was the big problem, right? It wasn't quality. It was how do we decrease that to increase capacity and efficiency? And so understanding different business models, bringing that in, thinking that through in the delivery of your business is really key in the process as well. And so it's not a one size fits all, like you get all your paperwork and then you go to the bank or you go and apply to Alisa for, right? It's really having this well thought out, like a full understanding about your business and what it takes to run it effectively and efficiently. And taking into account your board of advisors, which are other entrepreneurs, also thinking about a financial strategy, a wealth strategy in your business as well, and educating yourself in all the different ways, because you have to evolve, I think, as a leader, in order to be able to get people to work for you, work with you, and to believe in your product.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That brought up to me a couple of examples, and then we'll dive into question and answer period. Thank you all for this information. I hope that it's serving as valuable to the attendees. But the examples that come to mind, one is SBA. There's a gentleman who has served in SBA for, I think, 25 years, recently retired, and went directly into starting his own business. I had a conversation with him on yesterday, Tim Jeffcoat, and had a conversation with him yesterday, and we were talking and sharing about what do I do, what is he doing, what is he looking for, what customer types is he looking to share with. The key thing that was so valuable is that he was humble. I was humble enough to share amongst one another and share insight from our own experiences. He's been with SBA for 25 years, but he was taking notes from what my experiences have been and sharing. I was taking notes from him, and then we're like, okay, here's the idea of how the synergies of where we could potentially work together. In 30 minutes, we figured that out. my point in that is you have to be able to connect with outside resources and other people and other entrepreneurs and be willing and open to learn and then figure out how can we do this better together. It's the only way. You cannot do it alone. And I stress that often with many people. The other piece or example that came to mind is an example of a trucking company, African-American gentleman who took over a family trucking company that initially had 6 trucks. And this is large dump trucks and huge trucks that work on construction and highways and so forth. This was 10 years ago, no, 8 years ago. But he took over the family business, 7 trucks, and worked it, participated in 10,000 small businesses, worked with SBA, was able to acquire his first line of credit. And that was 8 years ago. Today, his business probably is worth $20 million with 32 trucks, with federal contracts and state contracts. And that took time, effort, learning, and him asking questions and networking and being in the right place at the right time. $20 million later, and they were trying to save that family business 8 years ago. And it's possible. It absolutely is possible based on what Saudia, Alisa, and Emily are sharing. It definitely is possible. Alisa, last few words about SBA and WOSB. Any other thoughts that you'd like to share as to the opportunity that exists with federal contracting?
Well, the ladies, Emily and Saudia, absolutely did a great job of describing what those next steps will look like. I would say as you're thinking through your SaaS strategies, as you're thinking through scaling and growing your business, you may not necessarily be the expert, and that is absolutely okay. But going to whoever that expert is, or going to whoever is best at administrative record keeping, finding where those support tools are. The same way that we find our local nail technician, you can absolutely find that person that can get your administrative record and counting into order. And not necessarily even at an exorbitant cost. There are so many resources that are available to support you in growing your business. Ladies, we take our time to get our hair done, our nails done, to look sharp, to step out the door. And half the time it's for to look best for other women that are going to be there. It's not even for the gentlemen that are going to be present at a function. So we want to take the same amount of time and energy into what we do in growing our business. These are our livelihoods, oftentimes our legacies that we're handing on to the next generation. And our women-owned small businesses make such an economic impact, far greater than than men do. And so what we've seen in economic studies, women-owned small businesses turn their dollar back, mostly because we are often the caregivers. We are often the head of households. We are the ones that are doing all of the providing all the needs of those households. And so our dollar is of significant value to the marketplace. And so think about those things as you are deciding to grow and scale your business. You do not have to go at this alone. Please be open to getting support in spaces that you just don't know about. You're not sure what that is. Be very open to that, and don't be afraid to ask the questions. A lot of times we are pride filled. I've worked at SBA for a number of years, but I sit in many classes to make sure I understand the experiences of my small business owners. I've been a small business owner, but I still know that I don't know everything. And I know that there's always things that I can be learning. So absolutely. I hope that helps, Cynthia.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Emily, you and I had talked a bit about ARPA funding and the states that are receiving ARPA funding, Texas being one of them. And if any of you follow my Start.Pivot.Grow Capital Center blog, I shared information about the millions of dollars that the state received from the federal government to disperse through preferred lenders to make loans easier to access for women and minority-owned businesses. So Emily, talk to me a little bit about where's this money going?
Yeah, sure thing. So if y'all remember, ARPA signed into law back in 2021, came with a lot of things that are supposed to boost the economy in the aftermath of COVID. So a lot of us got stimulus checks in the mail. It came with things like like more benefits for unemployment, child tax credit, all of that good stuff. One other thing it did was it reauthorized a program that originated in 2010 under the Obama administration, called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. So what they did, and it really wasn't until the end of last year that things got up and running for states, but what they did was ARPA reauthorized and allocated $10 billion to Treasury to distribute to states and tribal governments across the country, specifically to help small businesses get loans, essentially. So improving access to investment and lending opportunities for small business owners. The smart thing they did this time, in my opinion, is that they also coupled it with a bonus incentives for what they're calling SETI businesses, and those are socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. So that's all the groups we're talking about today, but it's also inclusive of people with disabilities and veterans who own their own firms. So they will provide an extra incentive, essentially, if your state program is going to try to help even more, like create a more equitable lending environment for those particular groups. So Texas has a pot of more than $470 million that they applied for. So that was what was allocated based on the size of our state. That's really powerful. So what Texas has done is create two separate programs. The goal for both of these is kind of the same. It's really just to incentivize lenders to actually go that extra inch and make that loan if it's something that's kind of just maybe on the edge of lendable. So there's one that's a capital access program, and that's essentially the state will kind of match and put in a certain percentage in a loan loss reserve account for that lender. And so, a certain share of those loans that may, non-performing, the lender can get reimbursed for. Actually the bigger program, which is like, 2/3 of the chunk of that money, is for a loan guarantee program. Just a different tactic to try to achieve something similar, which is that the state will essentially guarantee a portion of loans made under those preferred lenders. And the important thing to know is if you're for all regular, any kind of small business, the baseline there is if you go to a preferred lender, which hopefully the list of preferred lenders will be coming out at some point very soon. But you get 50%. The lender gets 50% of that loan guaranteed. But if you are a certified SETI business, so women, people of color, veterans, people with disabilities, you actually, that loan is going to be more attractive for a lender because the government will guarantee up to 80% of that loan. So this is, Cynthia, something you and I talked about. It's just like, this is sort of just a strange economic time. Obviously, interest rates, are high. So we've got a little bit lower credit demand. We've got tightening credit standards for lenders, but it's not an all or nothing picture here. There are some really interesting programs getting off the ground that I would really encourage you to just make sure you're in the loop about when these preferred lenders come out, because this is why programs like this exist. It is to kind of bolster that lendability for the groups of entrepreneurs that we're talking about, because the federal government and the state government both recognize that improving access to opportunity is just going to be a huge net benefit to our state and our country.
Very, very true. Thank you so much for sharing that. So for those of you who are not in Texas, take a look at where the ARPA funding trickled to in your state. Chicago's killing it. Chicago administered $30,000 for small minority-owned businesses last year and finished that closed last week, as a matter of fact. And so businesses were able to access $30,000 grants through funding. And then they also have set up a new funding structure for small businesses in the state of Illinois, Nebraska, Vermont, as well, in Georgia.
California's doing some really cool stuff, as well as North Carolina. I mean, they're really interesting. So some states are also using that money for technical assistance, and also really interesting for climate financing. So for small businesses that want to get into that green energy. So if you're in a state like California, I think Chicago has one too, that, you know, just make sure you can check at least on your local government website, because there are some really interesting opportunities depending on where you're located.
It certainly is. And I post every Monday on the Capital Center blog. If you're not following on Start.Pivot.Grow, all of those opportunities that come my way, I share on Monday. So I want to take some time real quick to take some questions if they are in the chat. Let me just double check and make sure, but please feel free to submit any questions that you may have. And we have 10 minutes here, and I'll be happy to answer and ask of the panel members or guest speakers. So if you have any questions of anything, feel free to submit those. What's the time frame for the WOSB certification? Meaning, how long does it take from application period to certification for the most part, Alisa?
Our current average processing time is 180 days, so 8 months. It's because we do have a small team of analysts. So I actually only have 7 analysts processing applications for the entire country, and receive about 800 plus applications per month. So close to 900 applications a month are submitted to SBA.
Oh, wow, that's a lot. That's per month.
Yes, per month.
But it's quite beneficial. And so
Absolutely.
if you are interested, you definitely want to take a look at that certification. And that's a federal certification, which is different from a WBE or DBE certification. That's more on the state and local level. Is that correct, Alisa?
Correct. Absolutely. So you're in Virginia, it's called SWIM. And other places, DBE, MBE, those are your state and local certifications. So if you're looking just to, you know, operate at the state and local level, those will probably be better suited for you, where the certification process that I run would be for your federal marketplace.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sorry, Alisa, is it 180 days you said?
Yep.
180 days. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
I heard something else.
We have a question. For federal contracts, does the small business have to have FTE and PTE employees, or can they have contractors that work with them?
So it depends on the procurement. And so there are rules around how much can be subcontracted depending on the project. So it varies from project to project what those rules are that are applicable. And so you would want to make sure you understand the project, but understand the regulation that ties to federal projects, because that will define how much you can source out through subcontracting versus how much do you have to actually hire and have people on staff to support those particular contracts. And again, knowing those regulations are so important, because you don't want to unknowingly find yourself in trouble because you've violated unknowingly how much subcontract work you've resourced out.
Perfect. Thank you. And that's why you want to work with someone who can help you navigate that through your first initial tries to make sure you get a full understanding of how it works. Okay, thank you, Rosie. Is there anything coming down the pipeline for military spouses, such as certification for military spouses?
At this time, I'm not aware of any specific certification for military spouses. However, there is a path depending on the circumstances for military spouses to apply for the veteran certification program, depending on the circumstances of that particular individual. But there is not a specific one for military spouses, but you're welcome to apply for the WSB program for women-owned small businesses if you are a woman and satisfy the criteria of the program.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And should a business start off small with local contracts before venturing into federal contracts? I think you mentioned this in your presentation, that start small with small contracts, become a subcontractor to become familiar with the process and gain experience. But would you recommend them starting local or diving into federal contracts as a subcontractor?
I would honestly say seek a counselor. And the reason why I say that is because someone can guide you what your strategy is going to be and what would best suit the services that you plan to offer. So let me give you a website. If you go to sba.gov under local-assistance, and you can find not only the district offices, but our local resource partners. So our small business development centers, our women business centers, our other resource partners that are local and nearby. You would just put your zip code in and it will give you a listing of the nearest support resources. Starting off local might be the best way to gain enough experience under your belt. But depending on your network and what's within your network, a different strategy may be more appropriate. Some firms will tell you once they started and engaged in the federal market, or even made aware, people started calling them because what they had to offer was something of a need. So it depends on what those products or services are that you are offering.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then what are the first 3 steps you recommend for businesses that are 1 to 3 years old to implement what we heard today? Okay, so if you're 1 to 3 years old, 3 to 7 years old, or 7 to 10 years old, that's okay. Saudia, I'm going to ask you to answer that one. What are the 3 steps that we would recommend for a startup, a veteran business that's been in business 3 to 7 years, and then maybe an experienced business with 7 to 10 years?
So I think in the 1 to 3 year mark, you're really iterating. A lot of it is trial and error learning. And it still comes back to really having your understanding who you need on your team, who's your right customer. Sometimes you think who's buying from you is the right customer. This is when early days, you're also thinking about different types of pivots, different types of offerings. So really navigating the iterative process, 1 to 3 years. I think the 3 to 7 years, it's a lot of pain, of growing pains, because now now I've sort of figured out this is where I'm going. But you have to learn how to deal, to manage your clientele and to manage the infrastructure in order to continue to grow and to build. You're also really navigating adding employees to your business, and that really changes the dynamic. You now have to work really hard at your leadership abilities. Your EQ has to go up significantly. Your liabilities go up significantly. Where in 1 to 3 years, you could cut some corners. There's no cutting corners at the 3 to 7 years, because then you'll be out of business if you have a IRS investigation or workers' comp situation can put you out of business in a day. So you really have to be a grown-up in that 3 to 7 years in your business. And then in the 7 to 10 years, you're now thinking about what are some big opportunities I can actually invest in, right? What are some big partnerships that I can really, that's when you're looking at, depending on your industry, anywhere from, definitely based on your industry, anywhere from 10 to 30 plus million in revenue, right? That's ultimately your goals, you know, depending on the industry you fall in, but you're thinking about where am I going to be investing for new opportunities, or how am I scaling what I'm doing really well right now, and understanding your margins even more to execute that.
Perfect advice. Thank you, Saudia. One of the things that I want us to walk away with as we look at the state of small business, and I'll talk about the elephant in the room, and that is looking hopeful towards the future as relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I posed the question as to should we be worried about these programs going away that are designed specifically to help women and minorities? And I'll allow you all just to share your thoughts about the future. My thoughts are, it's business as usual. We continue going and we keep moving for now until we reach our goals. But Alisa, you had some wonderful advice when we had chatted before. Are we worried about the future for small and women-owned businesses at all?
I'll be honest, I know it's always going to happen. There are always going to be things that are going to be counter to what we have in place and what we are really doing that we believe is right. And right now, for me as a person in a role of service and a role of public service, I have to focus on what is right and what is the needs within the communities that I serve. And so that's what I lead with, and how I push the envelope in trying to make and create outcomes. What will be in the future, I have no idea, but what I got to do right now is what I have to do, and most important. So that would be one of the things I would leave on, and related to that particular topic.
Agreed. Emily, what's our future look like in this environment that we're in?
Well, I am also not in the business of prognostication, so I can't say what will happen. I mean, look, if you take a really bird's eye view look at this country, we have weathered so many things. A lot of cyclical economic situations, a lot of cultural challenges, different, political movements, and we have made strides and we've lost those. So there's no, I think, what Alisa was saying is like, we just got to keep going. I will say a couple of things that are just like really positive. So thinking about overall the income and wealth gaps, they're very real. They really are. And they worsened after the Great Recession, right?
Yes.
But the thing is, in the past several years, that gap has narrowed. And it's not that it's gone, but Black and Hispanic households, for instance, experienced a greater acceleration in terms of wealth and income than white families did over the past 4 years or so. And that gap has narrowed. In no way would I suggest we should be complacent about any of this, but it really is just positive shifts. And I would say the same thing for women. So a couple of years ago, for instance, marked the first time in this country that women's educational attainment outpaces that of men. So women are increasingly more educated than men on average in this country. Women are, increasingly starting their own businesses and increasingly in the workforce and making their own money. Single female-headed households, historically have been among the poorest in our society, but that is starting to gradually improve. So I think, there are a lot of things that we aren't going to know, but I think that we can't get too discouraged about anything, and we need to keep looking at the big picture for a lot of these factors.
I'm in agreement. Thank you, Emily. Saudia, your thoughts on the future small business?
So I think I really focus on Black women, and so unfortunately, what you know, in terms of the data, the wealth gap has widened for Black women towards in regards to white men. So in the 80s and 90s, it was like, you know, it increased by 5%. So it's not going right in the direction we would want it to see. And we're also, interestingly enough, in the last few years, Black women receiving degrees have declined, right? And so for me, when we talk about the future, it's always been urgent, right? And so I don't think about it as today is any different than tomorrow. It is the work. We need to continue the work. We need to be passionate about the work. And we need to change the narrative and the data, right? And so I'm very result oriented in the work that I do, because, you know, based in New York City. The comptroller released the data November of last year for income in New York. A white family is $280,000. Black family in New York is $18,000 per household. This is what we're up against. And it's not great news, but I think the work that we're doing matters, and we need to continue that work. And nothing that's happening outside of that really impacts where we are now, right? Like, it is so important, and I'm not deterred by anything or the future, you know, what's happening out here. So I don't know, it's not necessarily optimistic, but for me it is, because I think we have more allies than we've ever had in this conversation. And it's about us figuring out how to build our wealth and be able to push forward in that.
Agreed. Awesome. Thank you all so much. This has been invaluable and priceless. Alisa, Saudia, Emily, I appreciate and I'm grateful for your time. I know you are busy women. You do great work. I respect and appreciate you all. Thank you all for those who attended today. And I will be posting this and sharing it. And we'll provide a list of those resources in the blog that were shared today. And reach out to me anytime that you need help, or Alisa, Emily, or Saudia. Everyone have a wonderful, prosperous 2024 and a fantastic day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.